All right, so I want to talk with you about the skill of circling. And I put skill in quotes because you could also consider circling just not a skill, not specifically a skill, but also kind of a line of development or a way of being, all of those things. So I hope you hold that a bit more complex than just a skill, which, as we'll see, and I think it really helps to have an idea about what exactly, or be clear about what exactly it is that we're trying to get better at as we're trying to improve our circling skills. Right? It's kind of hard to get good at something if you don't know exactly what you're trying to accomplish or what it means to be good at something. So, the way that I think of it, I hope you'll find it useful. The way that I think of it is that improving circling, is a process that involves four basic components. And we're always working at improving how these four components come together and express. So, I'll tell you a little story that will hopefully illustrate my point, which is that I often train people for circling. And I often find myself in situations where I'm watching someone, coaching someone, circling another person, circling a circlee. And the circle will usually, especially if they're at the beginning stages of learning how to do the practice, the circle will usually go something like the circler asking, the person I'm training, asking the circlee, hey, how are you feeling? And the circlee going, well, I feel sad, or something like that. And the circler going, oh, okay, so you feel sad. Why? What's that like? And the circler going, well, it feels sad. It feels heavy. It doesn't feel good. And the circler then kind of goes, okay, so you're sad. It doesn't feel good. Okay. Does anybody else have anything that they notice about being with our circlee? So at that point, it's kind of obvious to me that they're stuck and they don't really know what to do next. So they're kind of like pitching the attention to the group, the participants, to kind of gain some time or something like that, to have a bit of space to figure out what to do next, see if something else will happen that they can engage with. So this is really interesting to me because in those situations, because I've trained in this so much, I wouldn't get stuck. I wouldn't have that issue because when someone gives me an emotion word or a sensation word, it's really obvious to me, or becomes really clear to me that potentially sad could mean a lot of things. There could be a lot of nuances to sad, a lot of versions of sad. Like, is it that they're lonely? Is it that they're hurt? Is it that they're grieving? Right? Is it grief about something specific? Do they have something that's more general that feels more like an existential grief to them? What exactly is going on? So all these possibilities kind of load up in my mind. And so it occurs to me then that the next thing to do would just be to ask for more detail about that person's experience. But this doesn't often occur to the person who's just starting out. So, what does that say about getting good at circling? Well, circling begins with the with our imagining, with the way we kind of consciously or subconsciously imagine human experience to be in all of its complexity or nuance, or in the case in which sad is just sad and doesn't have any more of those nuance, all of the kind of two-dimensionality that we might kind of be attributing to human experience without really being aware of it. So circling begins with what I think of as kind of self complexity. That's the amount of complexity we attribute to human experience. So obviously, the less complexity there is, if sad is just sad to me and doesn't have those nuances, it doesn't occur to me that there's anything more to get about someone's experience. There isn't any more interaction to be had around it, any more communication to be had, any more understanding to be had. Now, on the other hand, if I do perceive that there are nuances to emotions and sensations and people's experience, if I first of all actually perceive that about human experience as a whole, including my experience, hopefully it really starts with my experience. Then what that does is that then gives me the capacity to perceive. So perception. It gives me the capacity to perceive that in other people's experiences. So that when someone says that they're feeling sad, immediately it kind of clicks in my mind. Oh yeah, they could mean any number of things by that. There could be any number of nuances to that. So let's find out what that is, right? And the way that we find that out is by acting on that perception. So we would act on that perception by asking questions, by communicating, by having an inquiry, in the case of circling, into that person's experience. So we want to inquire to understand. Sad how? Is it like this? Is it like that? Right? And hopefully we'll get an answer. And when we get an answer, we get to get on the same page. There's a technical term for that, which I won't go into right now. Shared reality means a lot of specific things. But basically, we're getting on the same page with that person about their experience, what they're experiencing. So again, if I don't have that complexity, specifically we could say around emotions, then it doesn't occur to me, I don't have a perception that's more nuanced and deep of anybody's experience. It doesn't occur to me to ask questions about it, and I never get on the same page with them about it. We never get to have a conscious communication, inquiry into that experience. We never get to bring it into conscious awareness so we can really examine it together and examine our stories around it and how we feel about it. But if we, to the degree that we do have self-complexity, that it naturally occurs that we start to perceive all of that nuance and depth. Of course, then we would ask about it. Of course, then we could have a conscious communication, conscious sharing of understanding with each other about the story that we share or don't share about that experience. So really a lot of what we're starting with, and when we learn how to improve our circling, is to start to become really conscious about the ways in which we are constructing our idea about how human experience is. Is it deep? Is it nuanced? Is it not nuanced? Is it complex? Are there multiple facets and multiple parts to people, or are we just one thing? Is human experience something that's unfolding, that's organic, that's alive, or is it really something, do we relate to it as though it's something that's static, that's still, that's not changing? All these things are going to affect how we relate to someone's experience and how we interact with them in connection, in relationship with them. So we're working on becoming conscious about those things, becoming explicit within ourselves, and to develop a deeper and more expansive range of that complexity and nuance in a way that specifically serves circling and the kind of interaction we're trying to have in a circle. So the way that I like to teach circling is in a way that's understanding of this process. Now, you could say that this process is kind of artificial to parse out these 4 steps. I still find it really useful to think about it in this way. So whatever we're trying to improve in circling, we're always trying to improve the way in which these 4 things build on each other, and the way in which kind of all these other things arise naturally out of the self complexity and of the perception of human experience. So for example, if I were to teach someone the wine connoisseur technique or practice, what I would do is I would first have them actually notice in their own experience. So, the wine connoisseur technique it's a practice of noticing, being able to inquire into the nuance of human experience, like I kind of described before. Sad, is it a loneliness? Is it a grief, etc.? Where do you feel that? Do you feel that somewhere in your body, that sensation? If you do, those kinds of things. So the way we would want to practice that is by actually having someone first be able to notice that about their own experience. Many people don't actually notice about their experience that it's something that's nuanced, that has a lot of parts to it potentially. And so we'd practice that. And then when you take that insight and you orient it to other people, when other people share their experience, when they say that they're sad or they're happy or they're angry, does it immediately occur to you then that, oh, there's more to be understood, more nuance to be had around their experience? And then can you actually ask the right questions, communicate in a way that has you be able to understand how the nuances of that person's experience, so that we can get on the same page about it, so that we can actually connect about it, so that we can have some understanding of that person's experience. Kind of one of the risks here is that the technique of the being able to ask, right? Is it sadness? Is it grief? Is it loneliness? That comes from an insight about human experience. Comes from a fundamental understanding that human experience has potentially infinite nuances, and that our words can't really contain or convey the entirety of someone's experience. So getting to understand someone's experience is just it's an infinite, alive process. And then when you factor in that many people's experience shift as you get to know it, right, it becomes an even more deeper, even more complex experience. So it's based on that insight. It's not just a technique. So the risk is, if I just teach you what questions to ask, what things to say, then you miss out on the insight. You miss out on where that the reason to do that, why you would even ask that question in the first place, where that's coming from. And I think as a whole, we become less effective communicators if we don't actually fully understand the insight from which we're trying to communicate. The other thing would be that many people actually already have this insight. They already understand this, in which case I don't necessarily need to spend a lot of time with them trying to develop it. Maybe they just do need the words. They just need the words, and they just need the questions to ask, and then everything clicks for them. They understand that. So being able to have this model helps me, at least in teaching circling, hopefully be a more effective teacher, because we can differentiate, make distinctions about where someone actually needs to improve. Do they need to improve that, having that insight be a more stable thing, a stable way that they construct their self-complexity? Is it in the perceiving that they're kind of lacking in skill, in capacity to do? Is it just the questions that they're lacking and they don't know the right things to say, and so on? So I really take this into consideration whenever I teach anything in circling, whether or not, whether it's the wine connoisseur, or how to facilitate a group, or how to ask other questions about the circlee's experience. And you'll see that in all the other kind of models and ways I go about enacting this. So I hope that gives you some food for thought, that's useful. And let me know what you think. I'll keep putting out more of my stuff out so that we can explore this in more and more detail with specific techniques and other things like that. Thanks for watching.